Do people know this song? That's where that sample comes from. There's a particular genre of house that is just taking disco and chopping it up. Daft Punk obviously is doing a lot. You saw the amount of chopping that I had to be able to do to create a whole new groove. I really do think it's a form of songwriting. And obviously they're doing things like adding drums so that it sounds better on a modern sound system. Like if you listen to French house, there's a lot of this. Usually, in the second half of the track or at the beginning of the track. Right there is a filter. So today we're going to be talking a lot about effects, about different things that you can do to manipulate a song in real time to make it sound a little bit more unique. You've got your tracks already beat matched, you know what your next track is. You can play around with effects. Plus it can also be used to sort of make your transitions just a little bit neater. Today's demonstrations are going to have two genres of music. It's going to be Italo house and it's going to be trance, which I completely forgot to mention at all. That's one of the largest subgenres of this whole house techno family tree. We're going to play a little bit of trance, and one example of that, probably the most stereotypical Balearic trance in this Balearic beat corner, the sort of 90s trance version of that is Balearic trance. And remember, Balearic music is very much a holiday type music. It's both danceable, but also kind of relaxed at the same time. We're not trying to get the same crowd to come into the club every single weekend, because we know people are going to fly out and people are going to fly in. So we're just trying to get people in a holiday mood. So it's not as driving, and it's got these long intros. Balearic is very much about doing blends of music. Hip-hop mixing, for instance, will do a lot of cuts, quick transitions between song to song. Balearic is very much about slow transitions. A lot of other house and techno genres, even though they do slow transitions, they'll always try to beat match, and Baleric's less obsessed about that. It's like you can do an unbeat match transition, because so much of the Balearic playlist has long stretches of the song where there's no beats at all. So it's very easy to do a blend. But you are a little more concerned about, is this in key, for instance? So you go from one song to another song, even though there's no beats for you to synchronize. You want to make sure the chords line up. You want to make sure that the melodies and the bass lines line up between your blends. So this is a little breakbeat at the back. It's not a sort of the pounding four on the floor, at least not yet.
I'm watching the beat grid.
Right.
In the beginning, the beat grid was off, but now the beat grid is on. So is it changing throughout the song?
Let's take a look at it. Right here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So this is actually on grid, but the music is deliberately playing this almost polyrhythm kind of thing. It might be easier to hear the end of this where we have the beat. And then we're going to go into a breakdown, and the guitar's going to come back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So the one is not where the guitar thinks it is. Yeah. If I'm going to be doing beat gridding for a long period of time, I like to switch over to export mode. And in a second, okay, because you'll get a bigger view of the waveform. Plus, if you go up to here and say keyboard, You can do all kinds of like keyboard shortcuts. So all of those buttons that I showed you earlier, you can just assign it to a key on your keyboard, and then you don't have to keep using your mouse. There's a little magnifying glass here. And you can see that the beat grid is very slightly off. The lines there don't quite line up with the bass with the bass drum. So I can go to grid, and I can just shift it backwards a little bit. Yeah. So now it's online. Okay, and say if I want this to be the first beat, then what I can do is I can hit this button, and that just sets that as the first beat. Every 4 beats before that is the beginning of a new bar. Every 4 beats after that is the beginning of a new bar. If you're ever unclear, you can also just hit tap, and then you just tap. Yeah, okay. So it's got the tempo, but it's now gone off again. So I can just find the beginning, and then I can hit that. In most situations, if you're doing modern music that was made since the 90s, auto analysis usually works pretty well. So you can just go back and analyze the track again, and it's going to make a guess. Actually, it did pretty well. They might have improved the algorithm since. This is early Chicago house. This is Marshall Jefferson. Also, there's no genre that loves house music as much as house music itself. They just keep like shouting out house music.
Can you talk a little bit about Amapiano?
Amapiano. Okay, yeah. I'm not an authority on that. But basically, it's mostly South African. Before we talk about Amapiano, there was a genre called Gqom. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. It's Gqom over here. So it's like a Afrobeat subgenre, but very much house influenced. It's very much UK house influence in particular. Now this is fairly new. I think this is like, 2016. So only in the past 10 years, you've got Afrobeat kind of pattern, but it's very much a sort of a house tempo. So this is like great, high energy, peak hour kind of party music, right? It's like you've got a crowded club, everyone's already dancing. Amapiano came along later. A lot of the same artists who were creating Gqom went on to make Amapiano, and it has a more of a loungy sound, even though it still has that house tempo. That's Gqom. All right, so this is Amapiano. It's a little bit deep houseier. So the beats are very similar, but you've got those chords going on in the background. You can think of this as music that you either play warm-up or music that you play, very late night, 4, 5 a.m. kind of late night. It's very popular in the UK. That whole sort of chain of influence from the UK to South African music producers, and then a lot of the DJs from Africa bring that sound back to the UK, and it mixes so well with house music that a lot of UK DJs now include it in their sets. Gqom in particular showed up on the international map because it features very heavily in the Black Panther soundtrack. So when that movie and that soundtrack went around the world, a lot of those artists got a lot of international exposure. And I think that was a time when it really broke out of South Africa. The world didn't really know about Gqom until the Black Panther soundtrack. Let's play more trance. Not a whole lot to say about trance other than it is what the name says it is. You're meant to lose yourself into the music. It's really not about big drops. If there is a big drop in trance, it's probably not actually trance. It's probably like Dutch house or something like that. You will hear breakdowns. You will hear periods like this where there's just no beats. Some trance fans who don't like this because you can't dance to this, obviously. I like trance music that has breakdowns because that means I can rest a bit. All right, so different kinds of effects. Many of your controllers have a knob for what is called sound color, and most of them default to filter, right? So we already played with filters when it came to the filter house music earlier. All a filter is supposed to be doing is either cutting out low frequencies or cutting out high frequencies. So for instance, if I turn the filter knob clockwise towards the high side, you'll only hear high frequencies and not hear low frequencies. Right? And in fact, you can blend music that way as well. Now, filters have this thing called resonance. If I turn up resonance, then not only do you hear that I'm cutting out sounds, I'm also boosting a little bit of sounds right before the cut. That's way too much resonance, but I wanted you to be able to hear that. Same thing goes if you hear the same thing if I go down in frequencies. So that's too much resonance. Normally, kind of the average amount of resonance is like this. So that's a little bit. You should be able to also edit that on your controllers. So go up to settings. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to turn on all my effects, beat effects and color effects. And you see CFX, that's the color effects. And you see this param, this is actually adjusting the resonance of the filter. So if you leave it right at 12 o'clock, it's whatever the default is. And if you want to switch the filter knob to do other things, the default is filter, but I can switch it to user. And then I have a bunch of different things I can do, including filter. All right? And that will change what that color knob does on your controller, at least with Rekordbox. So I can use a filter to just cut out the bass of the track that I'm bringing out. So now you're only hearing the drums, the kick drums from the new track that I'm bringing in. And I'm just turning the filter just a little bit. In fact, I don't even have to bring the volume down on the previous track. I can just keep turning the filter. So you still hear a little bit of it, but only the high frequencies. And eventually I just turn it so far that you don't hear it anymore. So that's a different kind of way to sort of blend the track. Instead of using your volume fader, you use a filter. All right. The space effect sounds like this. So it's a little bit of an echo. And in fact, if I were to bring the volume down, you'll hear the echo tail off. If I turn it towards the left, I get more of the bass. And with most sound color effects, when you bring it straight up to 12 o'clock, the effect goes away. If there's an echo, you hear it tail off. If it's something like a filter, it will just cut off right away. This is dub echo. You can hear the timing's a little bit different from space. Space is very much keeping with the grid of the original song. Dub echo adds a lot of like funkier timings in there to sort of make it more obvious, I guess. Probably good if you're actually playing dub music. Both space and dub echo basically are applying a filter to the echoes. So the song itself is not filtered, but the echo is, and you can sort of hear. This is only the high frequencies are being echoed, and they're being continually filtered. So every time that echo repeats, it's filtered even more and more and more. Yeah?
If you use color effects echo and you pause the track, does the echo continue?
Let's try it. Yes, yes it does. But there is a problem. So say, for instance, I'm going to turn on the dub echo. If I cut off the crossfader, it just dies. If I bring the volume down on the individual channel, you do hear it tail off. But if I cut off the crossfader, it just kills the entire channel and the effect at the same time. The sound color echo, it's a post-fader. It comes after this fader, but it comes before the crossfader. So post-fader, pre-crossfader effect. It's one of those things you discover, unfortunately, in the middle of a mix, and then you realize, oh, that's how it works, I guess. If you buy DJ hardware, check the manual. Sometimes they have a full block diagram of how all of these components fit, and then you'll start to see, oh, that's pre-fader, that's post-fader. Really, really high-end gear, you might even be able to have a switch, which actually allows you to choose whether it's pre-fader or post-fader. Why anyone would want something pre-fader is beyond me sometimes. It is handy that if your echo goes completely out of control, you know that your crossfader can kill it, right? Like this is pretty extreme, and that just kills it. Whereas if I did that, it's like, it hangs around for a real long time. And maybe you don't want it to hang around for a real long time.
So is it all just hardware or also software dependent?
It really depends on where the effect is implemented. For a lot of the gear that I checked out to you, it's being implemented in software. In this particular case, what I'm using is hardware. It's actually circuitry that's actually built inside this chassis. You sometimes have the parameter. This is actually controlling how much this echo feeds back onto itself. Because if I have the effect off, and then I turn on the echo with my parameter all the way down to 0, you still hear a bit of an echo. You hear one repeat. Then if I turn it up, you hear more repeats of that sound. So it's not the same thing as wetness, but you do get to control the intensity of the effect a little bit. That term wetness, it's just music producer terminology for whether you're hearing the original signal, which is dry, or you're only hearing the affected signal, which is wet. And often in a lot of DJ hardware, the default is 50-50. You hear the original signal at its full volume, and then you hear the wet signal applied, just as much. Later, I'll get to the effect strip, and the effect strip, you can actually sometimes control wetness as well, right? But right now, I'm just talking about sound color effects. There's kind of two kinds of effects in general. There's effects that add something to the sound, and there's effects that take away something from the sound. And echo is very much an effect that adds something to the sound, right? I've got the original sound, I'm making a reverb, or I'm making some sort of like doubling of that sound, or tripling or quadrupling of the sound on top of it. A filter is very much a taking away of the sound. Even though you might have a resonance that also boosted a little bit, for the most part, a filter effect is about taking sound away. Taking those effects that take sound away, typically it doesn't matter whether they're pre-fader or post-fader, it works about just as well. But the ones that add something to the sound, the echoes in particular, it really matters whether the post-fader or the pre-fader. For the most part, DJ hardware manufacturers and software developers have kind of figured out which effects need to be post-fader, echoes in particular. But sometimes they do screw up. Sometimes it's like, here's this effect that really should be a post-fader effect, but they've implemented it as a pre-fader effect. Maybe because it's computationally cheaper to be able to do that. And it's difficult to use, but you only find out if you actually play around and try to do that effect in practice. I'm going to play much more kind of a UK trance kind of thing, which is not nearly as laid back as the Balearic style trance that I've been playing earlier. This already starts off, this is more clubby, you know. It's still trance music, but it's much more of a clubby kind of track. In fact, this is a modern remake. The last couple of tracks I played were also fairly modern, so they're all contemporaries. Noise is very much an effect that we're adding. We're just adding noise. If I Now if I bring the volume down, it does nothing. So this again is a pre-fader effect. There's noise in the track. Let's see if you can hear it. That's a noise effect right there. It's still going. And say if I, before those drums came in, if I just want to add a little bit more, you can do that and just add just a little bit more. I know maybe one DJ who does that a lot, James Hype, and one thing he does is like, if that's what you feel like doing, you can do that. Crush is a short name for bit crusher, which is basically reducing the sample fidelity of the music. And it sounds a bit like this. It's like you're on a bad Zoom call. It doesn't do anything good to the sound, but it can build up a bit of tension, right? Because it sounds kind of awful, actually. But if you did it right before a big drop, then when that drop hits, it can actually feel like a big relief. Okay, let's try clockwise. It's a filter. They add a filter to the bit crusher effect. Think of like a nice sine wave that your music is made of, and it's kind of like making it jaggy. Or at least that's what it sounds like to me. I don't actually know if that's what's actually happening. So you're adding all these new frequencies to the song that actually didn't exist before. And then you can choose to filter that. You turn it left, it filters, it lets you hear the lower frequencies. You turn it up, you get the high frequencies. This is a very, very long build right here. So either you really like this and you're cheering, or you don't like this and you go and get a drink. This is what these builds are for. Just a little bit of sweep echo there, just to make it a little bit more hype, I guess. So now I'm going to use a filter to bring in the next track. The next track's already in at full volume, but the filter's all the way to the right. And I'm going to bring out the previous track using a filter. All right, now we're getting into Dutch trance territory. One thing about using effects, as soon as you've stopped using the effect and you've mixed out, you need to check that you reset everything. Because if you don't do that mental checklist, you're going to leave something on, and then when you bring in your next track, you're going to forget that you left it on, not what you intended. Dutch house has drops.